Alderneys Key FM.
Good morning, William.
Good morning, Dougal.
How are you?
Well, if I was a meat eater, I would say I'm as fit as a butcher's dog.
Good, but you're obviously not.
I'm not.
Okay, so I think there's a lot to go through this morning.
Well, there is, but I'll just share a bit of bad news for a particular person on the island this morning.
Okay.
She knows who she is, but this morning was the first walk in shorts. And what that means is that the Tate Lycra body-hugging leggings are no more.
Something happened to them?
I'm disappointed because I know she goes out specially, or used to get an eyeful. So I'm sorry, Anne.
You do realise this is before the watershed, Mr.
Well,
Tate?
you know what I mean. Well, what can I say?
Yes, well, I think you've said it.
Well, I have. I mean, the other great thing is that, you know, when we're talking about things looking a little bit more normal, you know, I'm sitting having my breakfast this morning, and I see Nigel Dippo going off to work, I see the gardeners going past, so, you know, that's really encouraging. So,
It is.
bit more back to normal.
That's good. That's what. Well, I don't think we'll ever be normal. I don't think we ever have.
Well, I have to say, I don't think I'd want to be.
No, we like
We're
being
all
different.
individuals, and we're all, you know, we all have our own ways of doing things.
Yes.
Right then, Dougal, there's a fair bit this morning.
I'll let you get on with it then, William.
So apologies to everybody. It's going to be a bit sort of technically, but I think that it's important that following the media briefing last Friday, that we sort of have a really good idea of where we are now and where we're going. But I'll start as I always do. Again, it's really positive news, and, you know, we have to be careful that we don't get carried away, but by the same token, we can see now that things are certainly heading in the right direction. So as at yesterday afternoon, there were 252 positive cases of COVID-19 in the bailiwick, but of course, as we know, all on the island of Guernsey. So the rate at which infections are taking place is now very low, at an average of 1 per day over the last 5 days. Now, we can't forget that the number of deaths is still 13, with 4 other deaths which are COVID-19 related, and that's a figure we will never forget. But the encouraging figures are that the number of people who have now recovered from the virus is 217, and there are only currently 21 active cases. So we've reached the point now where Dr. Brink can look at the future with a little more confidence, which is why I'm going to go on to the exit strategy, which was announced on Friday in general terms, but I think it's important that we're all aware of the direction of travel. But Dr. Brink, in the media briefing on Friday, also talked about the R value. Now, I think anyone who has been watching this unfold in the UK, and particularly over the course of the last few days, the R value seems to be talked about a lot. And what it stands for is the reproduction value, and it is a measure of transmissibility of the virus. And it goes from 0 to 10, and basically what that means is if your reproduction value is 10, then one person will infect 10 others, and those 10 will then individually affect 10 others. So you can see that where you're at the top end of that scale, the rate of transmittability is exponential, because it's doubling all the time. And that is something, of course, which everybody is focused on not happening. But that's the extreme of the reproduction value. So you come down to the other end of that scale, and Dr. Brink has, as she said, we all know how much she loves science. she's done the work around that, and she has been able to assess that the reproduction value at the present time here is 0.85. So that's less than 1. So if you have the reproduction value of 1, then one person gets it, they give it to one more person. They give it to one more person. So you can see the contrast between the exponential growth if you get to the top end of the scale and the limited growth if you're around 1 or below. And below is the target for the UK and for our jurisdiction. So that's a real measure of where the virus is and the rate in which it is infecting people. So that's a real positive that we are under 1. But Dr. Brink made the point that we're talking about small numbers for the island because we're only talking, if the bailiwick, so we're only talking a relatively small number compared to the UK. So she doesn't want to just rely on that. But what she will do is look at the rolling 28-day trend of that figure. So she'll get a sense over time of where that figure is. And she will publish that information on a weekly basis. It can't be done daily because there's too much variation, but weekly with a view to the 28-day trend. So then she can monitor exactly where the virus is or where it's reproducing. So that's a really positive thing. But in addition to that, Dr. Brink feels that the adaptive triggers are also a really important part of that moving forward. And we remember that the adaptive triggers she's talked to us about before, and they're things that she will monitor to see whether or not there is any reason to think that the virus is starting to spread. And if she finds that that is the case by, for example, community seeding or by increased reliance on beds in the hospital, then she can very quickly respond to that and put in place measures to stop it. And similarly, if the trend is going the other way, then she will allow her to start to loosen the restrictions. So she's got a dual approach in all of this, and I think we're all really confident that in so doing, whatever steps are taken to relax the restrictions are supported by the evidence. And again, it's just another example of how fortunate we are to have the public health team supporting us, because the resources that she has available to her and the way in which she leads her team, who I have to say she said thank you to on Friday, and I think we share that. It's not always the person that stands at the front. It's the people behind them who do the work, which is just as important. And so she wanted to just recognise that, and I think we'd all like to share that. So that's a sort of idea of where we are with the science. She's also very pleased to see that most of the cases now are being found by contact tracing, so that means that works. The number of cases which are brought on where travel is an issue is virtually nil, and there is a decline in cases in the care homes in Guernsey. So all those factors give her the confidence to be able to make the decision to move us slightly forward at a very, very measured pace. So that brings me now to the release on Friday. And again, I think it's really important that we all understand what lockdown looks like, what's the thought behind it, and does it strike the right balance? So please forgive me. I'm going to read this because I think it's important. And this was released on Friday. The exit framework is a transitional plan for the gradual easing of restrictions in the bailiwick of Guernsey, which are in place in response to COVID-19. The full framework document will be made available in the week commencing the 4th of May In the meantime, an infographic has been produced to help explain lockdown and the phases to exit, which can be found by downloading it from the coronavirus page of the gov.gg website. And again, I would recommend anybody who has access to the internet. It's a document which is very readable for people like me that don't really understand a great deal about science, but it's a really clear indication of the way forward. So if you've got the opportunity, just take 10 minutes to read it and digest it. So going back now to the release, central to this framework is the need to protect the health of the bailiwick from the virus that causes COVID-19. In addition, detailed consideration has been given to the economic position of the islands. The framework reflects the need to balance the risk posed by COVID-19 with the broader health and well-being of islanders. It is important to note that the framework doesn't discuss education in any detail, nor the wider delivery of public services. Both of these issues are being mapped out in detail and will be added as soon as possible. There is no right or wrong way to exit from lockdown. No one has had to do this before, and there is no roadmap to follow, and we don't have a definitive timescale. Whatever decisions we make, they are based on public health evidence and the following core principles that support our response to this pandemic. 1. Protect and preserve life. 2. Mitigate and minimize the impact of COVID-19 on the community. 3. Minimize the economic, social, and environmental impacts. 4. Promote the restoration to normality as soon as possible. We will learn from new public health evidence to make decisions along the way, and we'll keep you informed on this journey. Some of the later phases of the suggested transition have less detail about what we can expect, but will be further developed over time. This information will be refreshed as events unfold and populated with more information as it becomes available. Thank you to all of you for staying at home and going above and beyond to support each other in the community. Please continue to work with us as we transition out of lockdown. So that is the basic framework to which they are working. And again, I just feel really comfortable with the fact that we have got such professional people dealing with all of this in Guernsey. And I think, that's something we should reflect on daily. Okay, so the second part of the media release on Friday were some more relaxations. Not massive things, but again, steps towards the new normality. And I suppose the most important one for us was that each household will now have the option to pair up with one other household, making an expanded household bubble. You may pair up with a friend or with extended family and will be able to socialize normally in each other's homes, but not outside the home. This needs to be a reciprocal arrangement by mutual agreement between the two households to be part of a joint bubble. Expansion of these household bubbles can include over 65s as long as they are aware of the risks and are able to maintain good hygienic standards. So this is for home activities only and not for activities away from household premises. So it's an interesting one because you will have to choose your friends very carefully, because you only get one go. So you can't have friends who are in your bubble and then you can't be friends in somebody else's bubble. So there's all sorts of connotations to this that you can think about, and some friendships might get a little bit strained. Some people might wonder why their best friends haven't asked them. Well, that will all work its way through. But again, it's just a small step, but it just means we're able to meet and do what we do best, which is as social animals interacting with each other. So these decisions might look small, but in terms of the risk to health, Dr. Brink has to be really convinced that in doing this, it's the right way forward. So that's why it appears to be a small step, but in the scheme of things, a very serious one. So that means that you can now have your extended bubble. Not a term I have to say that I find favour with, but there we are. In terms of other activities around recreation, so there have been some concerns from pilots that they've not been able to maintain their aircraft, which is a worry when you live somewhere that's surrounded by water. But thankfully now there has been some relaxation around aviation. So in terms of general aviation, pilots may now fly in local airspace if they give a minimum of 24 hours notice and they operate within current airport opening times. They can only be accompanied by someone from the same household, may not leave local airspace, and must take off and land again in Alderney. So this is an opening up of the airport to people who want to fly in from who knows where. This is simply giving the people who own aircraft the opportunity of maintaining them and making sure that they're safe. Recreationally, this will be great news, I know, because the golfers have felt for some time that a little consideration could have been given to them, but it wasn't felt by Guernsey that it was appropriate. So now golf and tennis can be played by two players, and outdoor sports, coaching or personal training can take place on a one-to-one basis. Group leisure or sports activities are not allowed, so football, rugby and cricket, large groups of cyclists, clubs which bring people together, and dances cannot take place. So again, it's all within the context of keeping everybody safe. But if you are the golf club or the tennis club, I think you will need to register with Guernsey, which we know all about how that system works. So that might just be something they will need to do. Now, in addition to the further details announced on the next phases of the exit from lockdown strategy this week, which will put, I think, a lot more flesh on the bones as to what the direction of travel might look like for us, because one of the heartening aspects for us from Friday's announcement is that after a lot of negotiations behind the scenes by our civil servants, which has been going on now for several weeks, there is a clear recognition that tailored measures for Alderney and Sark will be part of the framework. Now, if we just think back a few weeks, we engaged with Guernsey and we presented a paper which invited consideration for Alderney to be given a little bit of leeway so that we could make decisions which we felt were really relevant to us as a much smaller jurisdiction to Guernsey. But the view that was expressed then was that it really wasn't the time to start looking at different policies for different jurisdictions unless there were compelling reasons. So now that has changed, and so now part of this framework for moving forward will be that Guernsey will listen very carefully to what we will have to say about how we would like to see exit from lockdown working. So we'll follow the same broad pattern to get out of lockdown, but there will be some scope for a slightly different approach in Alderney where that makes sense. We'll still be led by the public health experts, but this is a welcome development which I hope will enable us to make this work better for the island. And so those relationships are being put in place at the moment, so there is a dialogue which can take place, and so that is something else that we should think is a really, really positive step forward for us. Now, there was also a slight change to the financial support measures for business, and again, these things have to change as time goes on. So it's now been recognised that businesses which have been unable to trade and whose turnover is below 40% of normal turnover will need more support. and the payroll co-funding scheme will now pay 100% of the minimum wages for employees. This will be really welcomed by the worst hit businesses. So just to be clear, if your turnover is 40% lower than it normally would be, then rather than the 80%, you can now claim 100% of the minimum wage for employees. And I suspect that's something which will be particularly relevant here. Okay, now just a little run round of bits and bobs. I got an email from Roger Fulbrook last week, who had read a piece in the Mail where, to celebrate VE Day, I think they had commissioned a Spitfire, and they were asking people to put their suggestions forward as to how best it could be used on VE Day. So he, not surprisingly, suggested that a trip down here would be a very welcome thing, and would certainly make our VE Day celebrations look a little bit different. I'm sure that they were inundated, and the chances of us being successful, I suspect, are thin. However, it just demonstrates that, people are thinking about what can we do here, and, Alderney solutions. And that's just an example of somebody who's taken the trouble to try and improve our mental well-being by seeing one of those iconic aircraft that did so much to protect us during the Second World War. So I might be wrong. I would love to be wrong, and it might just appear on Friday. We'll see. I've also been told about the letters that Barbara asked the children to send to our more senior residents on the island, and the children, we were told, really enjoyed doing it. But what I've now been told is how much they have enjoyed getting the letters back. So it's not just a question of a one-way relationship. So that, again, it's just one of those things that comes out of situations like this, where even in the darkest hours, it still shines through. So, we've established relationships now, and it's a great thing. And it's being recognised now that interaction between more senior people and children is really, really good for both, because you've got enthusiasm of children and wisdom of elders, and that can't be a bad combination. So, again, massive well done to Barbara. As always, she's hit the nail right on the head. She's also received from Randall's, the off-licence, over 200 small bottles of wine. Not for her personally, because she doesn't drink, but they've been donated to Age Concern. So she's spent days now delivering them to the people who are in Age Concern. And again, it's just a real act of true charity. And it's just something that just brightens somebody's day. So a glass of wine, something which, we take for granted. But when it's given in these circumstances, it has an added poignancy to it. And I think that, again, big shout out to Randall's for that. Finally, VE Day on Friday, the radio broadcast. I'm being asked to provide a programme which sort of is a bit grandiose in a way, because we've had to sort of make it up as we've gone along, and we've got as much into it as we can, but we're still waiting for one or two contributions. But what I can say is that in addition to those things which we are doing to coincide with the UK, albeit they will be at different times, we've also got some really personal contributions which are really just about Alderney. So I think it will be a very entertaining hour if it all goes well, but that, of course, the responsibility for that is on Dougal's shoulders, I'm pleased to say. But I think it's one of those things where, again, circumstances are such we've had to take a completely different view of this. It might not be perfect, like a lot of stuff around this, but rest assured, we put a lot of effort into it. A lot of people in the community have contributed to it, and if it all goes well, again, I think it's going to be one of those things we look back on and we can be really proud of. So I think, Dougal, I've rattled on long enough, and I'm just, over to you.
Lovely, William. Well, thank you for that. Well, while you've been talking, I've just had a phone call from the Mad One.
Oh, yes.
And she'd just like to point out that the wine and that is not from Age Concern, but it is through Age Concern that are doing the deliveries, and it is for all the elderly on the island. So she just wanted me to point that out. So she who must be obeyed. I've done that.
Oh, well, tell you what now, I'll be for it now.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, I think that's great, William, and we've got a good understanding of what it is. And you're going to be back on again when?
I'll be back on Wednesday because there's another media briefing tomorrow. Now,
Okay.
whether we learn anything more then, I don't know, but we're fingers crossed. So, yes, with a bit of luck. But in any event, I'll just come and give a quick update on Wednesday if there's anything else that needs to be done. But, yeah, we'll put Wednesday and Friday down. Oh, no, Friday, we can't do
No, we can't Friday, I'm afraid. Well, no, we can't Friday unless there's something that we do need to put out. Then I'm sure we can put it in at 9:15 again.
Well, I'm sure that with your skills, Dougal, you'll make it all look seamless.
Please don't put me under pressure, William.
Why not?
But we will work something out. Don't worry. But thank you very much for today, and we will speak to you again on Wednesday. So keep safe.
I will, and everybody out there, keep up the good work.
Yeah, thank you very much, William.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Alderneys Key FM.